Cosmic Connections. I'm Starling Brighter. I'm here with Christopher and Faye as we have been interviewing each of the speakers for the Cosmic Patterns Astrology Conference that is in March next year. We have today Rick Levine with us, and I'm really excited to talk to him because I've been reading Rick Levine's horoscopes when the internet first started, and now I'm dating myself in age. But how are you doing today, Rick?
I'm great, thanks.
You're great. I'm glad to hear it. It's kind of a full circle for me to be able to talk to you and communicate with you on the podcast. I think it's going to be such an exciting conference that we're going to be able to have you at. You are going to be doing the one of the workshops, the pre-conference workshops, and that's going to be an exciting topic that we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. And he's also doing a lecture. So Rick has been around in the astrology world for so long, and he has done everything from writing to a Patreon, which you can find him at if you go on Patreon, just look up his name. And he does YouTube things and on Instagram as well. So you can check him out in all those places and get to know him if you don't already know him. So he'll be able to share some of his wisdom with us and share a little bit about what he's doing at the conference too. So thanks so much for joining us, Rick. I really appreciate being able to talk to you today.
Yep, it's my pleasure, and I'm really excited about this conference. It's, you know, I have 4 planets plus the North Node in the 11th house, and so I'm a bit of a conference junkie. There was a time in my life when I actually thought I could just not have a place of residence and just live at conferences. But I'm really excited about this one because it's different than the typical conference, and I'm really excited about its focus and about what it's doing. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, and we have the amazing Faye backing us here with Cosmic Patterns. So, I mean, you can't go wrong with that. So it's going to be an amazing conference, and I'm looking forward to being able to communicate with everybody and learn, because it's all about that. It's all about learning, right?
That so, it is. When people say, "Oh, you're a master astrologer," I go, "Hell no, I'm a beginner." You know, it's like, I mean, my favorite thing about teaching is you have to learn. You know, if you're not always learning, you have nothing to teach. You know, you have one lecture to give and you're done. That's it.
Exactly. I feel the same way. That's an interesting. Hearing that from you is really cool. I don't think I'll ever stop learning because it's there's so much more to explore. So, you know, in talking about that, you know, when I was just learning astrology, and probably most people are like this, you might read the horoscope and just like, you know, read your sun sign or something like that. But then when you start digging in and you start understanding yourself, you can really get into really fine nuances of understanding. And that's what I'm really excited about to hear in your workshop. Your workshop is going to be on harmonics. It's on the name of the workshop is Harmonic Aspects in Natal Chart Consultations. So he's going to bust us out of the 12-fold zodiac, which is really cool because I'm a vibrational astrologer. We use harmonics as well. So I don't know really a lot about harmonics, how much difference there is. So I'm really curious about that. And, you know, if you don't know anything about harmonics, this is like probably the perfect place to be because you're going to be able to learn, you know, from someone who's been doing it for so long and that is open to sharing and exploring. So what made you kind of decide to go in this direction? Or did you start out your path with harmonics? Was that something that you evolved into?
So first of all, I am a vibrational astrologer, and anyone who doesn't understand how astrology works. Now, depending upon what techniques they may use or may not use, that's a different issue. And and this is where I consider the work that I'm doing kind of a crossover, and I'll explain more about that in just a moment. But like many people of my age, my generation, and even from what you said about yourself, Starlene, many of us got into astrology via sun sign astrology. And I have to say, there was a period in my professional astrology life when I made the claim publicly that any astrologer, any real astrologer who wrote sun sign astrology columns, basically was a disgrace, that no self-respecting astrologer would ever, write that kind of crap. So of course that's what they made me do. Um, and
Make you eat your words.
but like many astrologers, my first real dig into astrology was Linda Goodman's sun signs.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so and people don't realize that Linda Goodman was the first author to ever receive a $1 million advance. Not just an astrology author, but the first author. That's how popular her work was in the late 60s. Anyhow, I love Chris Brennan's line, and I give him full credit for it, that sun sign astrology is the gateway drug to horoscopic astrology. And I would say that right now, one of my places in the world is that what I call harmonic aspects, and I'll come back to that in a moment as to what they are, but harmonic aspects are the gateway drug to vibrational astrology and to even harmonics in astrology. Because for many astrologers who learn that they are a Gemini with their moon in Scorpio and Pluto is in the 6th house, which blah, 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 when they then look at a harmonic chart or at a vibrational analysis of what frequencies, how their chart vibes, they lose it because it's not astrology, it's something different.
Right.
And so what I have, I was going to say developed, but I'm not doing anything original. Or if I'm doing anything original, I'm doing a Gemini rising, which I am, thing of just connecting dots that already exist. I've not invented it.
It's a good way to put it.
And so, like many people, I basically was totally enamored with not only cosmobiology, Uranian astrology, the idea of a fourth harmonic wheel, a 90-degree analysis. I not only, like many astrologers, was totally enamored with the work of John Addy, and early in my astrology work, I was, before there were computers in the mid 1970s, I was sitting with my little desk calculator, multiplying things times 125 and dividing them by 360 to create a 125th harmonic chart. And in fact, in 1977, I bought my first personal computer before most people even knew they existed, because calculating harmonics was such a pain in the butt. I mean, that's really, and although I never wrote software to do astrological calculations, because thank God other people did, like David Cochran, like Michael Erlewine, like Rob Mann, I mean, and certainly other people like Mark Pottinger and other people.
Yes.
But I wrote a lot of software to basically be able to input positions and have it translate that from zodiac to to 360
degrees,
degrees, and then create harmonics and then do analysis on what aspects were showing in that. That I did, that was like one of my early things. So when it comes to quote unquote vibrational astrology and or harmonics, I'm not a newcomer by any sense of the imagination. And in fact, there are a few things that fed my interest in astrology. One is I have a BA in psychology. I was planning on going to the Jungian Institute and being a Jungian analyst, but I got sidetracked or tracked by astrology, and I wanted to get out of that what I wanted. Secondly, so I have a background in psychology. Secondly, my second influence in astrology is I have a very strong background in music. reading, writing,
Yeah.
violin from third grade through high school orchestra, trombone and baritone horn. You feel like a treble, like a baby tuba.
Yes.
Through high school marching band, piano lessons, reading, writing,
I
music,
love your recording.
and these days I play straight flutes. I play a lot of
Flute.
what are
Yeah.
technically whistles, classical recorders, and Native American
Yeah.
and some other. But my point is that music is vibrations,
Yes.
and music
Yes.
is mathematical,
Years.
and astrology is simply low frequency vibrations. We'll come back to that in just a moment.
Yep.
So this is really what fed my interest in astrology. A couple of other influences certainly is certainly my interest in Eastern spiritual traditions that both Hinduism, Buddhism, and other Eastern traditions that fed my love of astrology. And then fourth, and maybe in some ways as important as anything else, is my strong background in science math. I went to college to be a high school geometry teacher. That's what I wanted to be, but I switched to psychology within the first month that I got to college.
Wow.
And the thing about my science math background is that my interest in the history of science and in its relationship, its long-term relationship with astrology, and here I hold something in common with you guys, and that is fondness. When people say, "Oh, you're an astrologer," who are your teachers? What's your astrological lineage? My answer is Pythagoras and Kepler. Period. That's it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It goes back to them, of
course.
course.
I share something with you guys, and that is, I was a founding trustee of Kepler College, but I named that college, and and I named it for a reason, because Johannes Kepler understood that astrology was not based on the zodiac. In fact, he said, "I'm throwing the zodiac away completely," although he didn't quite really do that, but he intended to. And I think that in some ways, that's what vibrational astrology understands, this idea that was proposed by Kepler, that until Kepler came along, no one ever really thought that the planets were frequencies.
Right.
In fact, this is where modern, early 20th century science began to understand that at the microcosmic level, and let's be very, very clear here, the word cosmos comes from a Greek word that means order and beauty, because the two to the Greeks were the same. And the microcosmos, or the microcosmic level, is that which is very, very tiny, meaning in physics, the subatomic realm. But it also means that which is internal in our mind, the microcosmic realm of the psyche. And so we look at, as astrologers, to the cosmic realm, which is technically the macrocosmic realm. And on the middle, there's what we call the mesocosm, which is the middle order of beauty and order. And in fact, what we as astrologers believe, or we say we believe, but I think a lot of astrologers shirk from that, is that as above, so below, the within is as the without. Now, this does not mean that one is a reflection of the other. That's the great misunderstanding. What the Emerald Tablet, Hermes Trismegistus, actually proposed is that the macrocosm, the without, the above, the microcosm, the tiny, the within, are one. They are the same. It's not one as a reflection of the other. It's they are the same. And we're surfing some sort of energetic vibration that sees these two things as opposites, but in fact, they're the same. And now here's the punchline to this. And that is that as scientists began delving into the microcosm, what they realized was that what they thought were particles were actually particle waves. That light is not a particle, as Einstein won the Nobel Prize or was awarded the Nobel Prize in physics for, that a photon, which is a packet of light, a quantum is a packet of energy that makes an interference pattern in the mesocosm. We perceive it as something that exists. It has substance, but that particles are only particles when we look at them. When we don't look at them, light travels like a wave.
Yes.
And this particle wave duality, if the in and the out, if the below and the above are the same, then planets are not particles. They are particle waves. And we can interpret them as an astrologer, a classical, what I call a Newtonian-based particle astrologer, basically looks at these planets and says, oh, the particle of Saturn is at 16 degrees of Pisces, and maps the particle into a chart where all of these particles, and I actually refer to the planets, all my students know the planets as BFPs. Those are big fucking particles. It's a technical term, you can say it. Now,
Technical.
But the point is that the planets are particles, but when we don't look at them, Saturn is propagating at roughly 3 cycles a century. It's a waveform. The moon is 13 cycles a year. Pluto is 4 cycles a millennium. And so here is the great breakthrough that has happened correspondent to science's understanding of the particle wave duality at the microcosm. This has already popped into astrology, but most astrologers have no idea why this has happened at this point in time. And it's because we, as a human cultural intellectual breakthrough, we understand now, or we're confronted with the idea that particles are not particles. They're only particles when we're looking at them and popping the quantum wave function into particles. Everything is propagating as waveforms. And this was the great breakthrough of the 90-degree wheel of the, Hamburg School in Germany in the early 1900s. This was the great breakthrough of John Addy and the introduction of actually calculating harmonics in astrology. And certainly, a breakthrough that is attributed to and promoted by Sirius Software and in Kepler, because of its understanding of the vibrational aspect. And this is why vibrational astrology is so important. And I'll end my little rant by saying that for many astrologers, the conceptual jump from looking at a chart to vibrational astrology is as complicated as someone thinking of I'm a Gemini to wait a minute, but my sun in Gemini is square Pluto and blah, 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 blah. And so I look at the work that I do with harmonic aspects, not as a final point. In fact, I don't know that there are any final points in astrology.
No.
But it's a way for people to begin to understand and to integrate into their normal natal astrology work the use of harmonics without jumping right away to the idea that I can just throw all this away and look at this through a different lens. So that's
Wow.
And is this going to be your workshop? Is this what your workshop's going to be about then?
The workshop will start off with an introduction to the particle wave concept in astrology, but then from that, jumping into the fact that, often when I teach this concept, one of the things that I ask at the beginning of a class, and I'm sure I will ask it at the beginning of the workshop, is how many people here do charts on a regular basis? Most everyone raises their hands. How many of you use harmonics? And in a typical group, maybe a quarter of the group or less will raise their hands. And then I go, how many people who use aspects? And everyone will raise their hands.
It's the same.
And then I go, okay, so here's the deal. Here's what we need to start. Aspects and harmonics are the same thing. They're just a different way of languaging it, and it's a different way of understanding it. But but you need to understand that if you're using a trine in your interpretation, you're using the third harmonic. If you're using you're using the fourth harmonic. And now, having said that, how many of you use harmonics? And everyone raises their hand. And this is where I begin the workshop, because if you understand the relationship and the limitations of using aspects without harmonics and arbitrarily skipping over those aspects or harmonics that don't divide evenly into 12, you begin to understand where your astrology is lacking.
Right.
And of course, that begins then with the division by 5, which our guy Johannes Kepler introduced into astrology. And then the division by 8, which our guy Johannes Kepler introduced into astrology, with the curious thing of he skipped over 7, because without a computer or a calculator, 7s are just an abomination.
It's too difficult, yeah.
To work with. But the point is that when we begin looking at charts, and until we had computer software, like Sirius software, until we had this kind of software, there was no way to look at a chart and see the septiles or the quintiles or the octiles or the noviles or the deciles or the, what I like to call the 11 tiles, because
I saw that. It's like 11 tiles. I knew what it was, but I was like, I never heard that word before.
Well, the reason, cool. I mean, part of the problem with using these new, I say new, they're not really new aspects, but new way of framing these aspects is the languaging can be overwhelming. And in fact, when you look at most astrology software that calculates some of these aspects, you see the 12th or the 11th harmonic, as the undeciles, or the 10 plus 1, decile is 10, undecile, and then a half a decile is a semi-decile, and a decile and a half is a sesqui. An undecile somehow seems connected to that, and it's not. That's the 11s. And so German for 11 is elf, and some people use elf tiles, and I like just 11 tiles because it's easier. And yes, there's 13 tiles and 14 tiles and 15 tiles. The problem with it is that as you get into the higher and higher harmonics, it's harder and harder to see them or to map them on a wheel, which is why I stick to, when I'm working and teaching harmonic aspects. I just finished teaching a course at Kepler College, an introduction to using harmonic aspects in natal chart interpretations, is because from 1 to 12, you can see them in a natal chart. And so that's a lot of what this work is about, is just about loosening people's limitations onto thinking that there's 12 signs up there. There ain't 12 signs up there. There's 12 signs in here. We made this up.
Exactly. Exactly.
And it's a good reason why. Anyhow.
Well, I think your point too, which is really about the limitation of language. We don't have a lot of words for the things beyond. I noticed that in the talk that you gave up in Seattle, that you did that. I was really impressed with that, because you talked about some of the limitations there and how we need to go beyond them. And I just noticed that of you, that you definitely push the envelope of things. So wanting to go beyond. I really noticed it when you dealt with the idea of talisman, and we have them in our pocket. And that one registered with me. I'm like, you're right. You don't have to wait for certain things. We have it where you've got it.
Chris or Christopher, or both?
Either one.
Yeah, I actually, the topic that I refer that, and I've done workshops on this, I call those the planets in your pocket. We always have all the planets in our pocket if we can just figure out how to take them out of our pocket and have them be in our life. And then we have the other planets that are in our life that are messing it up. How do we grab them out of the world and stick them back in our pocket temporarily? It doesn't matter what your sign is or what the current transits are. We all have that capability.
It really stuck with me. I mean, when you said that, it just really just went, but that just froze me right there. I'm like, oh, that's a really good line. That's a really good way to express that. So
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. This is going to be exciting because of helping people see that there are, I've said this so many times to people and they look at me kind of crazy, like just what you said. If you're using aspects, you're using harmonics, and it's kind of like, what? And you have to sit and explain it, but sometimes you still don't get it. I've struggled making that bridge, if that makes sense, but I'm working on that. Maybe it'll help me, give me better words to use to help other people understand the bridge. But you made a really good analogy too, with learning vibrations and, just knowing you're a Gemini or whatever. It's a very big leap to go there. It's really not, but people make it a big leap out of their mind. So
well, it's really not for you, Starlene, because you've taken that leap.
Right, exactly. At first it was.
Until you do, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't astrology. Well,
right. It's some other thing. And I mean, it's great that you're going to be able to help to give that to people. Now I'm wondering what your, what is it, 40 first vibe is like, because that's usually the bridge that bridges two things. So anyway, I'll have to get your birth information later and look at it. But that's it.
I already did, Starlene. So.
Oh, don't worry, I'll get it. Yeah. It's funny. But yeah, I think this is great because that's what is needed, that bridge. And I agree. All astrology is vibrational. Actually, I heard you say that before. And I thought to myself, that's so true. There is a proper vibrational astrology in some sense with the model, but there's also vibrational astrology as in everything. Isn't everything in the world vibrate? It doesn't Hermes also say that too? That's one of the Hermetic principles, is that everything is vibration. So, I mean, it makes sense. It's so
Pythagoras 101. Everything is vibration. And the second, no vibrations arise alone. All vibrations arise in sympathetic harmony. Yeah, that's it. All you need to know.
Yeah, that's why this conference is very important. This is the purpose of the conference, is to link everybody's astrological technique into vibrational astrology, because without them knowing, they're actually using the aspects, the harmonics, the vibration of each of the planets. We are all using it regardless of what astrology we know. So this bridging this together, this conference is really, really very important.
I remember a breakfast that I had with Rob Hand, probably 30 years ago, when I was first writing my original, what I call quantum astrology work, which is really sits behind, a lot of the techniques and practices that I use. And I was talking to Rob about this, particle wave thing, and how we as astrologers are stuck in this Newtonian paradigm of treating astrology as particles. And he said, well, no, that's not true, because when we look at transits, we're looking at the planets as waves. And I said, that is what I thought until I really thought about it. But the fact of the matter is that when we're looking at transits, we're looking at the collision of particles.
Exactly.
We're looking at not Saturn as a wave, but what's the moment of when the wave of Saturn hits the wave of the moon. That's a particle interaction. Right. I said, the only thing that I know of in transit astrology that approaches this is Grant Lewis's work on using Saturn and using this cycle throughout our life as the rise and fall as Saturn goes from the IC to the midheaven and back, and tracking that through someone's life. And Rob said, that's interesting, because that's one of the techniques that I use in every natal reading. I go, well, that is astrology as a waveform. But other than that, we don't do that. And so a lot of this is about, I teach my students, let's not look at a chart to delineate it. Let's not look at a chart to analyze it and talk about each individual piece. Let's look at a chart and try to find the hum. Forget about vibrational astrology. I don't mean forget about it, but look at the natal chart. Natal charts have hums. How do we find our way into the hum of it? And of course, this brings me to now from the pre-conference workshop on harmonic aspects in general, is that my lecture is going to be a new look at oppositions, Because if you tell me that you have a Sun-Saturn opposition, we immediately make assumptions about that opposition,
Yes.
about the stress and about the need to
Right.
overcome the obstacles and the
Right.
feeling maybe of insufficiency or the running into authority. I mean, all the regular things that one would come to mind.
Yes.
And then we look at the special cases and we look at a planet 90 degrees to those two planets, what we call a configuration, or what astrology calls a configuration, is really a multi-planet harmonic hum.
Right.
Yes.
And so
Planetary
you have
patterns.
everybody would know what it would mean if you have, for example, Uranus at a point of a T-square, meaning that you have that Sun-Saturn opposition with Uranus 90 degrees to it. That's going to change the nature of the
Exactly.
opposition.
Totally.
But now, what happens if you move that Uranus so it's trine to Saturn and sextile the Sun?
Yes.
In other words, you
Yes.
still have the same Sun-Saturn opposition, but now Uranus is trining Saturn, sextiling the Sun, and it dissipates or relieves that energy with an ongoing, almost like a capacitor blowing its charge. It almost prevents the charge from reaching a point of criticalness because it's reducing the flow of energy, or it's reducing the stress on that opposition.
Right.
But now here's where it gets interesting, because even astrologers who use a T-square, or what's sometimes called, the point of Thales, the point that is sextile and trine in opposition, most astrologers would not notice if there is a planet that is semi-square to the Sun and sesqui-square to Saturn,
Right.
or a planet that is quintile to one side, and if it's quintile to one side, it's going to be tredicile to the other side, meaning a sesquiquintile. In other words, or a planet that is 1/7, a septile to one side and 2.5 septiles to the other side. We don't notice these things.
Right.
And yet, just looking at them, we begin to understand that even a simple opposition is going to be influenced by the hum of the larger vibrational pattern. And the illustrations, examples that I've collected basically change how we interpret an opposition.
Exactly.
Because an opposition is not an opposition. And the same can be said of any aspect. Just came across a chart in my apprentice program. We looked at a chart of Bayard Rustin, who was a civil rights leader, activist, and actually was the person who was the ringleader and the coordinator for the March on Washington that attracted over 250,000 people in August of 1963, that resulted in the Civil Rights Amendment, or the Civil Rights Law, I think it was. But the thing is that he had a very tight trine, and you look at a trine, and again, you can say Jupiter trine the Sun, and you know exactly how to interpret that. But what happens if in that trine Saturn is novile, which is 1/9 to one side of the trine, and 2/9 to the other side of the trine? In other words, a novile is in effect a trine of a trine. It's 1/3 of a third.
Right.
So if you have a trine with another planet that is activating that on the 9th harmonic, it changes the nature of that trine. It makes it overwhelmingly stronger, and you wouldn't notice. And it's a planet that does that. It takes that kind of expansive, maybe not grounded, overwhelmingly expansive Sun trine Jupiter, and with the Saturn at that point of the novile and binovile, it grounds it, and it makes it something that becomes so real that you can coordinate an event of 250,000 people, no problem.
Right.
Yeah,
That is
it's
why
true.
this technique is very, very, very accurate. It's because a lot of astrologers are focused on just the two planets without even looking at the others around it. But like in an environment, if there is the rain and there's the sun, then there's this combination of two energies in there. And if you put something in there that is blowing, there's also the wind. It becomes the hurricane. So really, this is very, very important.
And there are also, agree with you totally, Faye, and there's also astrologers who only use the Ptolemaic aspects.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
not fair.
I mean, I'm amazed. I mean, as we look at what's going on right now in the world,
yeah.
Yeah.
you know, it's easy for most astrologers not to forget, but never even to notice that the Saturn Pluto cycle is such an important cycle when it comes to the conflict between boundaries and the transformation, whether they're physical, national boundaries, political boundaries, or intellectual boundaries. You know, we look at the Saturn Pluto, you know, conjunction, square opposition cycle, and we can see, you know, like the foundation of Israel, or in 1982,
Right.
Israel's invasion of Lebanon, a bombing of Beirut. And right now we have Saturn. I say right now, it's a 3-time because of the retrograde. Saturn made a half square, 45-degree angle, an 8th harmonic, if you will. Saturn makes a half square with Pluto, and it did it exactly on May 6th, within 1 day of the initial incursion, overwhelming invasion of Rafah by Israel.
Wow.
And on that same day, within 24 hours, there were 14 towns that were bombed in southern Lebanon by Israel. And I, on my September forecast, because the second of these 3 Saturn semi-square Plutos occurred exactly on September 25th, I said that the eclipse, which we just had in September, combined with the exact aspect on September 25th, I said that we would see it would be likely that we would see another whole wave of Israeli incursion, you know, and offensive. And of course, on the day of the eclipse, they had the cell phone pager fiasco. And now we've just seen Israel make a totally new invasion into Lebanon. And the third and final of these 3 semi-squares is going to be in January, just a week after the inauguration, or the scheduled inauguration, assuming that it will happen here in the United States, of the president. And so by not seeing or not acknowledging the potency of these aspects, and I think the 8th harmonic is particularly important because the division by 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, this is where the maximum interference happens, and that's where things kind of pop into the 3-dimensional world, where sometimes a transiting or mundane quintile, septile, novile may not make a ripple in the outer world unless it hooks onto a square or something that creates the manifestation. But still, it's just, you know, once you begin to look at these, as I know, I mean, this is me preaching to the choir, I know you guys know this, once you begin looking at them, you can't ignore how potent and how powerful they are.
It is.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
why this is very, very accurate, very powerful, and I want everybody to learn this. And I'm not stopping until the end of my life. I'm gonna keep going.
I have a question. When you're looking at these harmonic charts and these pattern, do you call them patterns in the harmonic?
Well, they're not harmonic charts, and this is for me, Sterling. Sorry to interrupt you.
That's
The
okay.
difference between harmonics and using harmonic aspects is that I am still looking at a natal chart with a different set of aspect patterns.
Right.
I get it. I get it. I see what you're saying now. Yeah, because you could. Yeah. So I've looked at that as well, where you sometimes just put in all the subtiles, or of the family of subtiles. So yeah, I can understand
The
that
Kepler
perspective.
harmonic
So
aspects.
that almost makes it even easier for people to grasp what's going on.
That's
Right.
the point. That's
It's
exactly the
aspects.
point. When you
just
look
blew
at
my mind.
when you look
I don't
at
know why I
like,
never thought of that.
when you look at like David Bowie's natal chart or Michael Jackson or William Blake, and you look at that chart and you take out all of the other aspects and you only look at the 5th and 10th harmonic, or only look at the 7th and 14th harmonic, and those are the only aspects that show,
They
and you
are
see
the
the
aspects.
complexity of the pattern and how the chart comes alive and screams and hums, or the first bombing of the World Trade Tower. Without the subtiles, you don't see how everything in that chart is integrated.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
when you look at the natal chart and you take out the trines, not that they're unimportant, but
Right.
you take out the trines and the squares and the oppositions, and you look at only those other aspects, all of a sudden you go, holy smokes,
Right.
what was I missing?
Right.
And so that's the difference between what I call using harmonic aspects
Aspects, yes.
and harmonic charts or vibrational analysis. It's a sequence of going. I mean, I grew up, my dad was an engineer who was like an early developer of FM radio. And I grew up with oscilloscopes and vacuum tubes around the house always. And to me, vibrational astrology, which is the future of astrology, is simply looking at these very low frequencies through harmonic resonance and seeing seeing the patterns.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
Exactly.
That's
how I
awesome.
feel too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be really good, because that'll help a lot of even in learning vibrational astrology, the approach is a little bit different than what you're describing. I mean, we understand the concepts because they're there, but the way we approach it is far more from sort of an internal kind of thing, where you're really looking and you're using it also in sort of a mundane way to see what's happening in the world from the natal chart, I would say. You're looking at those instead of just you're looking at actual events taking place. So that's really
always,
good.
Chris, not always. I mean, when
I understand that. Yeah, I understand that it can be applied both ways, of course. But yeah, that's really good. So that'll really help even those who have been involved in a lot of vibrational astrology. Again, it's just always learning. One of the things with convergence that we really want to do is just bringing everybody into the room, not trying to fight for a way, but just for ways that, like, okay, what do you do that works? Let's share these things, and
how
instead
can you be
of
effective?
Yes. How can we learn from each other and be together and know that, hey, we promote astrology, and understand that there are different types of astrology. There's different approaches because we have different language. But let's see if we can bring these things and understand, and sort of it's not about converting. You need to become this or you need to become that, but just to make everybody more open, better. If you can learn one thing, wonderful. So this sounds really exciting.
Here's the thing. I have a microwave oven in my kitchen that I don't think I've used 3 times in 15 years. Right. On one level, I could be a Luddite, and I could be the guy who, when Prometheus gave us fire, I said, no, I'll eat my meat raw. I'm not going to put my meat on that. It'll probably kill me. So I understand that, that kind of fundamentalism, And one of the things where we are in the world of astrology, and I have to say, I was a very early supporter, of Arhat and Project Hindsight, and the reintegration and the translation of ancient texts from Sanskrit, from Aramaic, from Greek, from Latin, from Hebrew. I mean, this has all been hugely powerful for modern astrology. However, we don't live in that world.
Right.
No.
We live in a world where, in fact, whether we've used language to verbalize this or not, we live in a world that is more subtle in its vibrations than our ancestors did. In our ancestors' world, they didn't have frequencies vibrating at 4.7 trillion cycles a second that created this illusion of you and I, you meaning Starlene, Faye, and Christopher, we're all in the same place. We're all here.
Right.
Where is here?
Yeah.
Here is in a vibrational realm.
Yes.
We as humans live in a vibrational realm, and
Yes.
our concern is not that we won't have enough food by tonight or water, or that we'll be attacked by a wild dog. I'm not saying that none of these things could possibly happen. They could.
Yeah.
But largely, we live in a different world. And I think that this move from the physical into the metaphysical
Yes.
is actually a larger transition that humanity is making. And astrologies move into this realm by first using 90-degree wheels, then using harmonics, and then vibrational astrology and or harmonic aspects are all symptoms of a much larger transition that we as humanity are going through, whether you know it or not.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to adjust those translated texts extremely old to the modern world where it's going now. You can't stick to that world. It no longer exists, but it's still doable to use it within the context of this current world. Now, that is why the Vedic system, there's so many materials in there that interprets aspects rather brutal. You're about to get killed tomorrow. And lots of people reading this, they get so scared and they don't want to get out of the house anymore. And this needs to be modernized. It's no longer the old world.
That's very true, Faye.
Yeah.
But the other interesting thing about Jyotish in general, Vedic, Hindu, Indian, whatever you want to call it, astrology, is that even in its absolutism, it's still understood vibrational in what they used as divisional charts, their harmonic charts. And so there's, going back 2,000 years, there's still this idea of the vibration, and still, even though it's certainly way more fated than modern Western astrology, there's still the concept of remediation that still has to do with the idea that we can do things. And I think in Vedic tradition, some of the things that we do aren't enough. They're still symptom level suppression rather than getting to root cause. But there's still that we have to acknowledge that these things did exist way longer than in modern times.
Yes, we're not forgetting it, but we can apply it into modern time.
Yeah.
It's almost like we're like, the way I look at it is almost like most systems of astrology have a branch of the same tree, right? I mean, that's a simple analogy, but some of them, the branch is big and then there's little shoot offs, and some of them is just, I mean, and they do all have a core common theme, because this is what we're studying, is the whole entirety of everything. And you're right. What I was thinking about when you mentioned, past astrologers, I mean, even as more modern, it's not modern, but Reinhold Eberstein, I'm sure you've read his book, what is it, The Combination of Stellar Influences? It's horrible. I mean, in terms of fatalistic, it's just like, wow, but we don't do that. But we also see it from a different perspective too. We don't have the same experience.
Right, and we can acknowledge that Eberstein and the Hamburg School in general understood in a limited sense, but because they were concerned with vibrational astrology only when it impacted the three-dimensional world.
Right.
In other words, they were interested in the cycle divided by 2, by 4, by 8, by 16, by 32. That's what they were interested in. And the understanding of dividing any planetary pair by 2, which gives us a midpoint. I mean, midpoints are incredibly potent. In fact, I'm sorry, I was busy interrupting you, Faye. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Say what you were going to say.
It's okay. The midpoint is important. It is the handle of everything below it.
Well, and that's right. And even in using harmonic aspects, I mean, one of my basic axioms when I'm teaching is midpoints are real points, period.
Yes.
So, and in order to, it's so easy, especially with the use of astrology software, it's so easy to look at an aspect and go, no, that's a 9-degree orb. I only use, 8. Boom. But then you forget that there's a 9-degree orb on the other side from another planet, and it's smack right in the middle. And that aspect is potent as it could possibly be.
Right.
Yeah.
That is why attending a conference is very, very important. It's because you learn all of these things, not just from one person, but so many teachers. I've traveled for many years, for more than 30 years, to so many conferences. And when we first introduced the advancement of harmonic astrology into vibrational astrology, which is actually the same technique, and then all these professional astrologers, bless their soul, they already left this world, and they come to me, Faye, I really appreciate you teaching these things, but the technique I'm using now, I'm earning a living and I'm too old to learn new things. So I'm going to stick with what I have.
Yeah.
That's what
I know well-known, competent astrologers who only use conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, don't use quincunx, don't even use sextiles. And that's their practice.
Yeah.
And it works. I mean, for them, for what they do and for their clientele, it works. And like you said, if it works for someone, use it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you're getting the whole picture.
Yeah.
Right. That's the
We
thing.
as astrologers, it's important that we are open to new things so that we can learn more. These doctors and psychologists, psychiatrists, they're required to go back to school to train more and to learn new things that can be applicable at this time of the current modern time, not stuck to their previous studies from their when they first graduated. They are required every year to take this test to make sure they know how to apply these things to these new things, and they train them. We astrologers, we tend to get stuck to what we already know and how to practice. We're not open to learning new things. So I'm encouraging all astrologers to learn new things, attend the conference, attend this conference, and especially this conference, you will learn from so many astrologers, especially the harmonics.
Yeah, I'm very proud to be included in the group of speakers at this conference. It's actually a world class group of people. So it's so thank you for including me in this.
Yes, thank you. All of the masters, all of the astrologers, professional astrologers from the very beginning that I started to become an astrologer are all here. And everyone should experience all of you here. This is the lifetime experience.
Yeah, definitely a great group of people that will be so much wisdom to offer, even if you're new or new to astrology, or if you've been there into astrology your whole life, you're going to learn something new there. So that's really
cool. Awesome. All the experts are here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm excited about your lecture. What's that?
I'm sorry.
Oh, what was that?
I said, thank you, Rick, for joining in.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing the work that you guys are doing. It's a really important piece of all of this.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely is. That's funny. So have you in your current moments, have you decided to stay in like an apartment or a home or something and not just live in conferences, or do you still live in conferences?
Yes,
it looks like a home, but it could be a Zoom background. I don't know. You know how that goes.
That's a beautiful.
No, this is my real home, and I live on the outskirts of Seattle, along a river. I have my moon is at 16 degrees of Cancer, and it's a very strong piece of my chart. And between my home and my kitchen, I live my Cancer moon for sure.
Wow.
And so, but my Cancer moon is very tightly partile, but only a few minutes of arc, square my Aries sun. And so that's my dilemma that most people know of me. Most people know of me through my 11th house, Aries, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, that are sextile a Gemini ascendant. And so they don't see my Cancer moon. And I don't necessarily mind that.
Yeah, I get it. That makes a lot of sense. It's just the Cancer moon's fine being on its own in its little shell, and that's great though. So you live on the West Coast, and that's nice. And you're gonna get to visit the East Coast. It's probably nice, cool up there, I'd imagine, in March, right? Where you're at.
Yeah,
It
March
rains all the time.
It only rains here once a year.
Right. It just doesn't stop.
October to April.
Yeah.
That's an understatement.
That's funny.
Actually, today was absolutely beautiful. Totally sunny, no clouds in the sky.
Oh, wow.
And
Yeah, when
they
it's
make
sunny in
residents-
Seattle, it's beautiful. It's the trick. When people visit it and it's sunny, they think it's like that all the time.
Yeah,
You
well,
used to live there. Christopher used to live there.
Yeah, I used to live
Yeah.
there. So
well, the thing is that, as Christopher knows, that when you get a driver's license in the state of Washington, well, in Seattle in particular, they make you sign a document saying that when anyone asks you what it's like to live in Seattle, you tell them it rains all
it's
the time.
horrible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Especially if they're from California.
That's
So,
right.
yes.
So funny.
It's part of the Anti-Californication Act.
It is. It is. Washingtonians really do not really like people coming up from California. So
That's wow. That's really funny. Well, you'll get to experience Florida in March. It's beautiful here too. So it'll be
it's really nice.
Yeah, and the hotel is gorgeous. Christopher and Faye have already visited. Faye's been there a couple different times, so it's going to be a beautiful experience for all of us.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And getting to hang out with you guys.
Yeah, definitely. That's
you
the best
bring
part.
your recorder. It's really beautiful. You guys have to listen to it. Oh my God. Maybe you can play it at the banquet.
I rarely go anywhere without a few flutes.
Yes.
Whether I play
Request
them or
for
not.
him at the banquet.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Great. Well, this has been such an awesome opportunity to talk to you and to get to know more about you. I'm super excited to meet you again, see you again at the conference, and look forward to hearing your lecture and your workshop. So that'll be great. So thank you,
Cool.
Rick, for joining us. Is
Again,
there anything else?
My pleasure. Nope. I'll see you all. And for those of you who have not registered yet for the conference, do it now.
Yep, do it now. And we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.